Once again, a very good evening to you. If you've just joined us, you're listening to Sweet Old Town Internet Radio, and as I look behind me, as I can do, I hear the voice of Declan Ford.
And here he is. Donald, how are you?
I'm very well, thank goodness, yes. And strictly speaking, I don't see you, but I know you're here. Social distancing at its best here.
You sense my presence.
Yes, we're almost like in a bus. You know the way you're
That's
sitting
right.
2 seats behind me and shouting up to me.
That's right. I'll start flicking up chewing gum and things like that now.
Anyway, how are you, sir?
Very well. I've been in the garden all day and just got in there before the rain started, and I must admit, it's great exercise. You know this current time, the pandemic, I think as they call it. You know, it has changed our lives dramatically. And you know what I think is the most positive development? We have to rely on our own resources.
How far back could you go, though? How much could you survive if everything stopped?
Well, you know, I think I could survive lately. You get into a kind of a mindset of a kind of a certain routine, and we all need human company. But I think the sound of silence now would rest easily on my shoulders, you know, and they send me to the proverbial desert island and supply me with the discs and of course a disc player, and I think I would be happy as Larry, whoever Larry was.
Yeah. And what book would you take with you, Declan?
What book? I would take a book called Home Before Night by the great Hugh Leonard, the man who wrote it. Do you remember Me Mammy? Do you remember that series with the great Milo O'Shea? And
yes, I do. RTE, yeah.
Yep. Well, Hugh Leonard wrote that, and he also did a lot of Dickens programmes or series for the BBC in the 1960s and 70s, and he wrote a great play called Da. But his book Home Before Night is about growing up in Dublin as the adopted son of two very, very eccentric parents, and the opening line is one that I've always remembered. It is, "My grandmother made dying her life's work." And it is an absolutely brilliant book. Anybody out there who knows the play Da, this is basically the prose version of it, and it is very, very funny. A great gift, great way with words.
Right. Tonight's programme
Yes.
will be musical for a change, because, you know, so many people are locked out of their places of entertainment and things. And do you remember, obviously you remember, because you live quite close to the Fernagh Cottage, belonged to the late great Owen Smith.
Or we had managed the great session there.
Right.
In fact, do you know the first session? Do you know when that took place? It was myself, Owen Smith, the owner of the cottage, Peter Smith, his nephew, John Smith, his brother, and a lady called Lizzie Clark, whose father was the last native Irish speaker.
Oh, and Craig.
And Craig, and you're right.
I remember her.
And a woman called, I think she was Sarah Ann McCullough. And Sarah Ann sang, and Lizzie sang, and they danced. And it was like a door being opened onto a world. And a few weeks later, there was a troupe up from Ashbourne, a man called Hugh Grugan, a great box player, and friends, Peter Farrell from Ballygawley, if I'm right, and a number of others had a group called the Wren Boys, and they were up playing music around Tyrone, and they were staying in the Silver Birches, and they were looking for someone or somewhere to go on the Saturday night for entertainment. And Paddy Grugan mentioned it to me, and I mentioned Owen Smith, and Owen said, "Sure, tell them to come on up." And about 3 hours later, this bus pulled into the sand ring at Fernagh. The musicianers, as they called themselves, got out, the singers and dancers, and that was probably the first Ceilidh proper. And that would have been, I would say, the early 1990s. And it kicked off from there.
Yeah. And so many people, I'm sure, listening tonight will remember Ceilidh houses if you go back as long as you and I go back. I remember my uncle's and aunt's house up in Quinn, up the Glen. When I was a young man, you know, there would be a Ceilidh set in for the house, and people would come and bring their own bread and a couple of bottles of Guinness or whatever, and the music went on to the morning.
That's right. And do you remember our old friend Sean Toner?
Very well,
he
yes.
talked about their Ceilidh house.
Yes.
I think was their Ceilidh house the one for the news.
they had different nights. Different men came with different agendas, I suppose.
That's right.
On a Wednesday night, they would have been the musical night. Maybe on a Thursday night, the women came, and there were 2 or 3 different nights a week when they done different things. But it was always known as a Keeley house or an open house. And from 7:30 to 8:00 at night, the great and the good arrived on their bicycles and whatever, and discussed the day's work and politics or whatever at the time. Yeah.
And of course, it gives the verb to Keeley. My granda, Patrick Keown, from the townland of Killiabig, outside the big city of Balleek, County Fermanagh, would go in as Keeley.
Right.
And just remember my mother telling me the strange thing was when he would come home, on the way home, he would see lights in the bog, and he would bless himself and say a quick prayer. And the lights, of course, as we know now, are kind of a natural phenomenon, but to him, they were an indication of some kind of a spirit.
Yeah.
And Killian was a big part of his life. And you know, when you think of it, life in those cottages, Donald, coming into the winter time, and it dark maybe at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, dark until maybe 8 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, to go Killian was a way, I think, of just, you know, surviving the winter.
It was a way of coping, wasn't it? Right enough when
yeah.
you think of it. But what a great way to do that. And you think that can even around, and even people in Omagh and places like up on the hill and stuff, where people didn't have their own front gardens. You opened the doors, and people came by and would have looked in and would have spoke as well. So certainly in recent years, people sort of came off and have their own front gardens and their own fences and stuff. Maybe down through the years.
That's right.
That things have changed.
And are now taking the key out of the front door.
Yeah, but I think this whole current event has brought people back in home, and maybe will be sharing their homes, because people won't go out as much now in the next coming weeks and months. And for entertainment, you'll probably find people will go and visit their close friends or people they feel maybe safe with or whatever. So
I think I would fully agree.
Yeah.
But isn't it strange the resonance that the cottage has? You know, I mean, I can think of a number of pubs that model themselves on both occasionally the exterior but also the interior of the cottage.
yes,
You know, you think of Anne Cregan, where you have self-catering accommodation, but on the surface it's all traditional cottages though, with mod cons inside.
yes, and
know?
if you take Main Street in Omagh as well, they have a cottage down there now as a pub as well.
Yeah, you know, and so I think there's a kind of a romantic view of the cottage. You think of the film like The Quiet Man,
Yes,
you know, and the cottage in it, and the resonance that had for the
Yes.
character Sean Thornton, that he was going home, you
Yeah.
know. But I was very, very lucky to have access to the cottage at Fernagh, because Lord, we had many's a great night. You know who came one night? You'll not believe me.
Charlie Lansborough.
Charlie Lansborough.
Yeah, I see. I know that.
Tommy Macon was there.
Right.
A great troupe called Romancas from Portugal, and they actually played a square bodhrán, and it was skin on both sides, and it was almost like a tambourine. It had bottle tops inside, so that you could play it like a drum, and you could also shake it like a tambourine. And they were that enamoured by the session that we had, they left the board, they signed the bodhrán and left it for Owen Smith, and it remained there on top of the dresser for many, many years.
Oh, how nice. How nice.
So,
Yeah.
So the Keeley night always had a certain a routine.
Yeah. But wasn't Owen Smith a very generous man to open that up to the great and good of the town, and people could come and feel at home and feel almost like a family affair, a genuine system like that where people could have a good night's crack, you know.
Well, you know, he had very high expectations of the people who were there, and in the old cottage, on the wall was remember the old Sacred Heart pictures with the names of the family.
Mm-hmm. Very well.
And that remained on the wall, and Owen would look at it and he said, "You do not disrespect those people.
Yes,
You know,
because
those people were good, decent people,
Yes.
and you honour their memory."
Mhm.
And that was a great guideline.
Yes.
Just that you had
Yes.
that kind of set of standards, and he was so generous. He opened it to musicians,
Yes.
and he didn't see himself at the centre of it.
He just was more or less facilitated.
Oh yeah. You know, he and I at the start would kind of remain very much in the background, and kind of gradually as the years went on, both of us sidled our way up to the fire. you would have the Fara tea, usually the late Paddy Grugan, my old friend, and Paddy would be introducing people and getting people to sing and dance, and he knew all the musicians, etc. But gradually Owen and myself infiltrated, and Owen would produce the bones and play the bones.
Oh yes.
And then we took to writing poetry. And myself and the great Malachi McNamee, an old colleague and friend of mine, he was very much, and when Malachi would say to me, he said, the McNamees were the bards of the O'Neills. And so he would write poems and I would write poems, and the sessions were great because it gave us something to work towards, to have a new poem or a song or a story for the next session.
Yeah.
And I think of some of the people who were there, the great Con O'Neill. Con O'Neill was a big tall man who, when a man, Don Carlos, was crowned at Tully Hog, it was Con O'Neill who led him in procession. And Con was a fiddle player, a storyteller, a historian, an archaeologist, a farmer, a man of all trades, and possibly the greatest storyteller, Shanachie, I have ever heard in my life. He was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant.
But Owen had a great feel for the Irish architecture as well, because he could explain to me, how someone, and the elderly person in the house, could stay in the sort of, we call the kilty bed, the bed beside the fire, and then the under room was for the young couple who would come in, but yet the older couple could dictate and understand what was going on. He said how all that evolved down through the years, and it was a great thing and a great shelter in every way, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, and I remember when Owen bought the place, they had an auction, and the tables and chairs, etc. That when you went into the kitchen, was sat perfectly upright. But when you put them onto the level, they tilted, because the floor was at an angle. And in the old traditional Irish sense, and the angle then pointed down towards the door, so that when the room was washed or sluiced,
yes,
the water automatically ran
out the door. Yeah,
it was common sense.
Yeah, he told me he got the floor for the cottage in an old byre up near Ballygawley somewhere.
That's right. And with his business, he travelled the country, and he had a great eye and a great appreciation for, I think, an old way of life, and he just had a great sense of what would have worked in the cottage, and he had two lovely Jack B. Yeats prints in the cottage, lovely old photographs, and the sessions now became in their own way legendary.
They did.
And of course, Owen had the cottage. There are other cottages in Tyrone. Paddy Montague, for example, out in Dewis.
Yes.
Pat Ward.
Is that due to Owen's influence, Declan, do you think?
I think that Owen would have been maybe the first to let people see the possibility.
Right.
And I think what he gave through his example was a kind of an appreciation of that old architecture and that way of life, and it wasn't kind of an aspect or amber, it wasn't preserved. It was kind of
a working cottage, wasn't it, in every way?
It wasn't a museum.
Yes.
It was, it was living and breathing. And when you think of the number of people who came through the door, from all arts and parts. I remember one night in the dead of winter, this guy landed, and he was Alaskan. And the people in the cottage, they were just open mouthed, because he had no shoe or no socks on, and he had just open toed sandals, and he had walked through the snow, and didn't take a flinch out of him. Like great storytellers that there. The great Peter High, who's possibly one of the best reciter of Marshall and Tyrone poems that I've ever heard.
Yes, I remember being with Frank Gallagher the night they done a recording for BBC. It was a Christmas special from the cottage as well.
That was 1 December.
Would have been, alright. That's about 02 or 03, that far back. And We're going to play some of that tonight, and then some other recordings of other sessions. We're going to try and sort of mash them all together for one sort of fairly good long session. I'm not sure if you remember some of the musicians there or not.
Oh, I do indeed. Wasn't the great Shay Hutchison there?
Shay was there.
He did a monologue of the golden guitar.
Didn't he?
Do you remember that?
I did indeed. And the late Stevie McKenna was talking about.
That's right. He and Haldane Mitchell.
Yes.
That's right, about history of Omagh and Tyrone.
And then Owen himself is featured in this as well, if we can get it out as well.
And of course Frank Gallagher, I mean, who fits like a hand in the glove in that session.
Frank was at home there. He really was. He was over at his aunt's and uncle's house. He felt at home there and really, really enjoyed it.
And then I think of other sessions that we had. Remember one night, the late Rosemary Woods came.
Yes.
Great singer from Portaferry, great songwriter. And I think as part of that, I think we had the great fiddle player Shane McAleer. And
the late Michael Gallagher, remember?
That's right, from originally, I think, was he Dromore direction, and then latterly then of Mountfield. Mm-hmm. He was a great slow air man. Oh, he was a mighty fiddle player. And
you would say that's Fernagh Cottage, that's where you cut your teeth, that kind of.
Well, you could say that. Yes, that is what actually it opened the door to me in so many ways. I mean, I always had a hankering after playing about with words, and to be honest, when I first would be asked to recite, I would fall back on James Young. You know, a bunch of the boys was whipping her up on a shiny roof.
Right, I know.
And I used to do that, and I got so tired of doing it, I said, I write something myself, and that started it. And I've never stopped.
I remember Tom Sweeney had a weekly event there during the summer months.
Tom used to take the barn, and he would just do mighty sessions of stories and songs. And I remember we had Walter Love did a programme from there.
Yes.
Highland Radio.
That's right, I remember with Brent Maxwell was there that night, remember?
P.O. McCann.
Yes, and P.O., that's right.
That's right. And then we had a great writer called Christopher Somerville came. Christopher is a kind of a correspondent with the Sunday Times, and he just loved it. He wrote a piece. We had a music session, and a couple of weeks later his piece appeared in the Sunday Times, and he had stayed for the few days that he was up in Plumbridge. And when he went on his travels, he would actually become engrossed with the Ordnance Survey maps, and he knew every inch of ground, and he was actually able to tell the people there more about their own County Tyrone. You know, he just was so, he was a geography teacher, I think, by trade. And he described the B&B that he was staying in, getting up, and after a hearty breakfast, going out for a walk, and just walking around the Plum. And he just said, I felt like a king.
My goodness.
And that was the I think, the sense that he had of County Tyrone. Was
he Tyrone originally, or
no, he's from Bristol. Oh, right. But he just had such an affection for Ireland and County Tyrone in particular. Okay. And you know, the cottage featured in many's an article.
Yes.
I think the BBC did a television programme about it.
Did they?
I think Kevin McAleer, the great comedian, I think came down and did a turn at it.
Okay.
In fact, Kevin cycled down to it and he parked the bicycle outside it, you know. God. But you know, I really look forward to hearing this.
Right.
I haven't heard this.
No, you haven't heard
this tape in
as I say, it's
years.
a mash of different pieces brought together, hopefully in the next hour and a half for your entertainment. So without further ado, folks, we'll introduce you to the Owen Smith and his lovely cottage in Fernagh with all the great and good of the local Tyrone musicians. So till we see you again, take care of yourselves and have a good evening. Bye.
Town that I was in, the county was hanging man, and nobody cared if he lived or died, and I just didn't understand. So I washed my face in the morning dew, sun. Washed my face in the morning dew and kept on moving along. The second strange town that I was in, they were laughing at a poor crippled man, begging for nickels and dimes on the street, and I just didn't understand. So I washed my face in the morning dew, bathed my soul in the sun. Washed my face in the morning dew and kept on moving along. Strange town I was ever in was settled, peaceful and nice. The rich got richer and the poor got poorer, and to me it didn't seem right. So I washed my face in the morning dew, bathed my soul in the sun. Washed my face in the morning dew and kept on moving along. I washed my face in the morning dew, bathed my soul in the sun. Washed my face in the morning dew and kept on moving along. Yes, I washed my face in the morning dew, bathed my soul in the sun. Washed my face in the morning dew and kept on moving along. And my journey will be done.
Ah, yes, indeed. My face. Now, for you listeners watching your radio in black and white, I think it's only fair to describe the Nutty Pines for you. Well, Declan O'Kane, the fiddler, yes, an intellectual stamp about the man, I would say. Pat Sharkey, you'd know by him that he can wield a mobile phone. Seamus McGurgan, what can I say? Meaningful and melancholy at be times. And Tony, the man I'm going to talk to first, a man who's lived and has been around. How you doing, Tony?
I'm doing all right, Frank.
You've played here before?
Oh, lots of times, yeah. We come up here about once every 2 months and get together just for a session and that, you know.
Well, how would you find a place like this to play in as distinct from cabaret gigs or playing in bars or whatever? It seems great to me.
Well, the first thing would be the sound in the place. There's a great echo in the place. It's great for music and just the atmosphere of the place, the fire. The crack is great, you know.
Now, you're originally Killyclogher yourself, so you're very familiar with the area.
I am, yep, I am. Well, I was born actually in Carrickmore, which isn't too far from here actually too. And then I moved down to Killyclogher and we've been living there since I was 3 years old.
Yeah, and going back to tradition, of course, the old bass guitar and the very laid-back Pat Sharkey. Pat, how are you doing?
How you doing, Frank? I think.
Any scandal we shouldn't know about?
Well, I've sold nothing this week, if that's what you mean.
Now, we're talking about the great atmosphere that's here and a place that you're all very familiar with. Does it lend itself to the crack as well as the music?
It does. Anytime we come up here for rehearsal or practice with Owen there's always great crack about it. And the people come in for enjoyment. And that's what music's about, enjoyment.
Well, thanks very much, Pat. We'll be talking to the melancholy and meaningful Seamus later on. But for the moment, lads, thanks a million.
opened the fire here from where W.F. Marshall wrote about, great man for describing the great brown back of Mullaghar and tickling throat and other rural pursuits. And apart from being very close to, he was also a clergyman, fine theologian, but a most wonderful ear for the dialect here of Mid Tyrone, and a most wonderful sense of lyricism and a most wonderful sense of humour. And I'm glad to know that his works have had a new lease of life. They've been recently collected and republished and indeed recorded, and wherever Tyrone people foregather, certainly Marshall, I think he's buried up at 6 Mile Cross, but we're certainly in his territory too. And Alice Milligan, a contemporary, also writing of this area, and also of the evoking the great mythology and folklore that has attended to it and still survives in many ways, as you can see, even into the end of the 20th century here. A lot of it has come down in a folk tradition. Some of it, the poetry and balladry, is so authentic that people not aware that it has been literally crafted, as it were, and take it as part of a genuine, spontaneous folk tradition. I mean, I could go on and talk about Felix Kearney, maybe from the other side of Omagh, of Frank McCrory, and various, many of them anonymous, who provided and hooked into the great tradition was around them, and certainly have done a lot to preserve it and to immortalise it. On a more formal nature, I suppose we could speak of Brian Friel, who was born and reared in Omagh, Benedict Kiley, who was reared in Omagh. William Carton's country is not that far away from us. Friel's latest, or last but one, the Dancing with Lunas, there was a success at the one time in London and Dublin, in New York and Hamburg, which must give us all a great sense of achievement. Ben Kiley would be acknowledged as the greatest living Irish novelist and broadcaster, and a man who in his time too, by collecting a balladry, has done a lot in the many, many years with what was the old Radio Éireann, did collect a great store and heritage of northern and Ulster folk music, and that's another part of his great contribution. Another Omagh man, born in Dromore actually, but we're in West Tyrone, I suppose.
Stephen, as a matter of interest, would there have been a big tradition in this part of Tyrone of people being hired out, say, from areas like West Donegal, away back from the Highland Fairs?
They went far away to get them. If you got them too close to home, they'd be home by the weekend. So they went. A lot of them from this area came from the Donegal, Lifford, up that country that Joseph Campbell did write so much about, and that was a feature of life in Omagh up until World War II. And there are people in this area yet who came into the place as Sarvan boys, and they were known as the poor Donegals, and they mustn't have been too badly looked after, because some of them stayed and have taken root here. But people, moved a lot around, more than you would think in those earlier days, even before railways or the modern means of transport or communication.
Well, Stephen, we'll be talking more with you later, of course. Thank you very much for the moment. Now, we're going to another local musician. He's a great traditionalist as well, and Tom Sweeney joins us, and he's going to kick off this time with Leaving Enniskillen.
Thanks, Frank. I have come to this place in the evenings for a bit of a session, and every time I come in here with the fire and the dresser and so forth, it evokes images to me of an American wake and the people sitting around, the boy about to head off to America. So I thought I'd sing you a little emigration song. Not from this area, but not from very far up the road either. It's a song called Leaving Enniskillen. I am going over yonder on that lonesome road again, and my heart is torn asunder, wishing only to remain. I am leaving Enniskillen, though my roots are stretched and torn, and I hope someday, God willing, to return. I will always hear you calling, as in far-off lands I roam. I will hear lake waters falling on my own Loch Erin shore. Memories of Enniskillen will linger when I'm gone, and I hope someday, God willing, to return. and someday I'll make my fortune, build a cottage on the hill. On a summer's evening listen to the curlew break the still. I'll return to Enniskillen when the autumn leaves are brown. Until then my heart will dwell in that old town.
Oh, well done indeed, Tom Sweeney and Leaving Enniskillen. You were talking about the place being evocative.
Yes.
An awful lot of your songs are evocative as well. That's no coincidence.
I think you're absolutely right. But this place here, I mean, is redolent with music and song and story. And you couldn't help but be a part of it and learn so much about the folklore of Ireland right here.
I suppose in one sense it's the first of the last of the Cayley houses, because years ago you just couldn't find a place like this, and if you go to a museum it's a bit unreal. This is very real.
Well, this is the real thing. I mean, there are people who come here just for the crack and for poetry and music and song, and I think Owen, the Fernagh here, did a wonderful job in building the place in the first place, purely as a sort of I suppose a patron of the arts, really, for people like myself and all the lads and the girls here to come in and sing and dance. It's a fantastic place.
Well, for the moment, Tom, thanks very much.
Well, the place was here, and it would have been a pity if it had disintegrated, because I think it's part of what we are. It's part of the fibre. The house is built out of the stones in the fields that are here, the stones out of the rivers. It's part of what we are, and it would have been a pity, because there are not many fine examples of vernacular architecture left in the country. And, you know, Board Fáilte for years have been plugging Irish cottages, and between here and Connemara there's about 4 of them left. So it's, you know, if only for that reason. Mary McAleer lived her life in this here. She was a fine old lady, and I got to know Mary, I suppose, in a mercenary kind of a way. She had a bit of good land, and I wanted to grow Christmas trees commercially. So we grew thousands and thousands of trees, and then the place, when Mary died, well, the place had to be sold, and I had a verbal agreement with Mary that we'd, you know, it'd be all right, like I wouldn't be doing anything wrong, but the beneficiaries of the will just didn't trust me maybe as well as she did, so the place was to be sold anyway, and the only way I could retain my trees was to buy the whole place. I didn't particularly need a house now. I had a right good house, but I needed a stable. I have a couple of nice horses, and we built the stables, rebuilt the stables, a couple of local lads here, James and Jimmy McCrory, his son, mighty man, and it was a pleasure to have them about the place. And we restored the stables, and we built round pillars, and we built walls, and then we eventually took the tin roof of the house and put her together again. I had brought an old lady here who was born in this house. She was 83 years of age when I brought her here. If I had hit her with a paling post in that door, I wouldn't have had as much effect on her, because everything that you see in this house is as it was when she left it, when she was a child in this house. The dresser was in the same place, the mail bin, everything is as she left it. She was out of the house for 61 years, and she came back here, and her mother's Sacred Heart picture was hanging where it was when she left it.
It's extraordinary, the sense of history, Owen, because could you tell us about the connection between the timbers and the tall ships 150 years ago in Ballyshannon?
Well, now, Frank, this is the truth. The timber in them windows, they tied tall ships to them in the port of Ballyshannon. I had an old place in Ballyshannon. It blew down one night, and I took the timbers here. And we cut up the timber and made the windows for this house. Now, the timber in the roof of this house was grown when the buffalo was roaming the plains of North America.
Plains of Tyrone?
No, it's all American pitch pine. They floated it in. But it was just what an Irish homestead was. There's only, it's not a big place, but it's... the land was good, as a man said to me one time, do you see that field? Sorry, he says, they grew cabbage as big as Mountfield. Well, I like the vernacular architecture of the country. It suits the hip of the Sperrin Mountains, a nice wee place set onto the road. If a bird was building a nest, this is where it'd build it. There's not much shelter between here and the Atlantic Ocean. Up on the road there, it'd blow the horns of a cow. It really enriches people, especially Irish Americans or Australians, and we've had them from South America, from all over the world. Well, I'll tell you a story now if you have time to listen to it, but there's a fella in this barn tonight. He came down through my gate one day and was painting a nice black line round the bottom of the house to keep the splashes off her. And he says to me, he says, and my name's Danny Conway, he says, I have my grandfather's place, he says, up in Sultan, he says, and he said, would you mind if I looked around? And I was more than pleased to give him the conducted tour and tell him all about the place. And he said to me, after about 20 minutes, he says, would you get a grant on a job like this? Says I, well, I don't know about that now, because there'll be a whole lot of men with suitcases telling you that you couldn't do this and you couldn't do that. Says I, if you want to write, you better use old materials. Says I, but I'll give you a good reason for doing it. If I had my grandfather's house, I would do it. Says I drove 400 miles yesterday in the west of Ireland. And unfortunately, says I could have shown you 4 examples of untouched Irish vernacular architecture, and it was in Tyrone, Fermanagh, Donegal, Leitrim, Mayo and Galway, all the way to Kailmore Abbey. And says I, that's the reason for keeping the architecture of this island. This is what Boardfaltia sold for years, but unfortunately they had to stop selling it because the cottages are gone. This is why I love this place. There's not a cement block nor a brick, nothing that could have been got since the turn of the century in the builder's yard in this place. And he restored his grandfather's house, and he's here tonight, and it's a beautiful house.
The interesting thing, and thanks very much, Owen, for the moment. A far tea and a half, as they say. And right across the road from here, our next guest lives. In fact, the story about Declan Ford is that he once encountered an American down about Shannon Airport somewhere. He introduced himself, Declan Ford, the poet from Tyrone, and the American proceeded all night to call him Tyrone. And he didn't correct him, he was made up, a Tyrone power, a powerful poet indeed. This time he's going to give us Harrigan and Mulligan.
Yes, it's a very sad piece. It's about a town not too far from here, known as Carrickmore, known to the locals as Carman. And it concerns 2 elderly gentlemen in search of a wife. And the late Luke Kelly used to introduce a song with saying, this song is a warning to all young ladies never to associate with old men. Well, this song is a warning to all old men never to associate with young ladies. It's a sad, tragic piece, so get the Kleenex out. You'll never see the likes again of Harrigan and Mulligan, 2 farmers reared on rocks and barren soil. Each man lived his lone in his father's home and spent his days bent in lonely toil. Now Harrigan was small and squat, while Mulligan was tall but fat, and though neither owned a tooth to call his own, both had reached that time in life when he wondered if a wife could change his cold grey house into a home. Now maybe I should mention the object of their affection, the delectable Miss Sarah Ann Mulgrew, who possessed a certain charm and a 20-acre farm, a most well-endowed young girl of 42. So that while Harrigan he schemed and while Mulligan he dreamed, though sadly lacking any curtain ways, that they'd both take their chance at the late evening dance at the crossroads next Carman Fair Day. Oh, you'll find all kinds there at the great Carman Fair, from the tinkers mending their tin, to the hawkers and dealers and cowboys and peelers, and every conceivable sin. This collection of gulpins from Cregan to Sulchan would barter and deal on the street, as the Carrickmore gentry, full in their finery, skipped lightly on hob-nailed feet. The place for any handling was down at McCallan's, a Nathan house well known to you and me. So after dandling up the town, both men settled down to the dubious delights of a Carman hay tea. I'll never feel as full again, says Harrigan to Mulligan, as he downed another plate of mutton stew. Then each man filled his pipe and reflected on the wife that he'd snare before that very night was through. An old donkey then walked past. "Oh, thon's the queer-looking ass," remarked Mulligan, taking in the view. But as Harrigan cocked an eye, another ship sauntered by, the respectable Miss Anne Mulgrew. "How dare you pup? Put your dukes up," goldered Harrigan, his face black as thunder. "How dare you disparage me intended for marriage? Come here, I'll rip you asunder." Oh, they kicked in the spot and they fought on the mat, tossing pipes, cups and caps in the air. "I'll crack your bloody skull again," says Harrigan to Mulligan, as they filed through the door down the stairs. Bouncing past Mickey Quinn's, this concoction of shins were battered and bait black and blue, as they rolled down the street to land at the feet of the redoubtable Miss Anne Mulgrew. Now, Harrigan he protested that Mulligan had molested her honour, and sure, what could he do? She waved this plea aside, and sneering she replied, "I'm a better man than any one of you." Well, the anger in her blazing eyes cut both suitors down to size as they toothlessly tried to charm her, and without even a second glance, she swaggered towards the dance and the arms of a Galbally farmer. Poor Harrigan and Mulligan wound their way home again to reflect mid the rocks, weeds and stones on how to snare a woman without expense or troubling, and to lie in a cold feather bed alone. The moral of this ballad is, take no one for granted. Big ignorance will always meet its match, and whenever you've any dealings with other people's failings, never count your chickens till they hatch.
Good, yes, indeed. The one and only Tyrone Ford, a.k.a. Declan, and that was fantastic, Declan. And we're going to be having a chat with them later on, but for the moment, Tyrone, thank you very much.
The famous Tyrone musician from the offshore called Tommy John Quinn, and he says, "All us musicianers know other." And there are several fellas here tonight playing instruments, and there are several fellas down there. There's some great lilters down along the back there, and maybe we'll get a few of them later on in the evening. But there's definitely a great collection of musicians, singers, and some great step dancers here tonight too. We're going to play 3 jigs, start off with 3 jigs. The Humours Glendart, Paddy's Return, and the Cash jig. So whenever you're ready.
Well, we're here in Fernagh Cottage, of course, and we're staying in the parish this time, appropriately, because our next two guests come from Killyclogher. Now, Eamon Michael Home is making quite a reputation for himself as a singer-songwriter. He's currently with Stockton's Wing. He's here armed with his trusty guitar. He's accompanied by his fellow townsman, Shane McAleer, on the fiddle. Here they are with Hold You Forever.
Travel around the world, the smoky bars I play. I used to read those letters that you wrote me on the way. But now I'm getting older and I'm helplessly in love. I'm gonna hold you forever. You never understood my intentions all along. It's only now you've realized that maybe you were wrong. You never believed me when I said you were my girl. But I'm gonna hold you forever. I stopped the smoky corners, I stopped the traveling too. I learned to sing a real song and I sang it just for you. I had to promise to myself to spend some time alone, but I'm gonna hold you forever. I'm gonna hold you forever and ever.
Well done. That's Eamon Michael Home there, accompanied by Shane McAleer and Hold You Forever. Eamon, the first thing that strikes me about that particular song is that it does have a Stockton's Wing sound to it. So did Eamon Michael Home have to adapt himself to their style when he was songwriting again?
Well, actually, I'll tell you about that song. That song was written about 4 years ago, and it was written as a country song. But myself and Shane used to do a lot of playing together, and he put a reel in the middle of it, so it was all really done before Stockton's Wing days, you know.
Yeah.
So that's basically where the song came from, I think.
By the way, well done, Shane. I was watching you moving your bow there. A fiddler and a half. You're lucky to be working with him.
Oh, an excellent fiddle player, brilliant fiddle player, All-Ireland champion, and currently playing with a traditional group called Dervish, so we'll have to get that one on as well.
As regards the, can you remind us how many people were auditioning for Stockton's Wing that time that you went for it?
I'm not actually sure. I think there was maybe I think there was maybe one, you know. Just no, as far as I know, there was maybe 12 or 15 people. I'm not totally sure, to be honest, but there were a few okay.
I have to talk to Shane a minute because, as I say, I was quite fascinated by the bow action on the fiddle. Did you come from a family of musicians, or where did you learn your fiddling?
Not really, no. I learnt from a man by the name of Sean Nugent. He's from Fermanagh, up Lack direction. But he's got connections in Omagh here. I think Felix Kearney was mentioned earlier on there. He would have been, I think, a great uncle of Sean Nugent's. And then again, they're connected again to like Artie McGlynn and people like that. There's a whole big interconnection of musicians around the area, like. But no one in our family ever played, really.
I'm always fascinated by the fact that there's such a mixture of styles in Tyrone and Fermanagh. I suppose I couldn't miss it between the Sligo style and then further north again. Now, we're going to meet Tony Hutchinson's daddy. In fact, we're going to meet the daddy of them all, Shay Hutchinson from Killyclogher, formerly of the Melody Aces, and the first showband singer in Ireland to enter the British charts. I had the great pleasure of attending a tribute to him earlier this year in Killyclogher. I wasn't invited, mind you. They're very fussy. I just attended. Yes. So here's Shay now with Walking in the Sunshine.
Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Put a smile upon your face as if there's nothing around. Think about a good time had a long time ago. Think about forgetting about your worries and your woes. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Oh la 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 dee ooh. Whether the weather be rain or snow, pretending can make it real. A snowy pasture, a green and grassy field. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Put a smile upon your face as if there's nothing around. Think about a good time had a long time ago. Think about forgetting about your worries and your woes. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Whether the weather be rain or snow, pretending can make it real. A snowy pasture, a green and grassy field. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Put a smile upon your face as if there's nothing around. Think about a good time had a long time ago. Think about forgetting about your worries and your woes. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Walking in the sunshine, singing a sunshine song. Put a smile upon your face as if there's nothing around. Think about a good time had a long time ago. Think about forgetting about your worries and your woes. Walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. Ooh, walking in the sunshine, sing a little sunshine song. My parents, particularly my father, was for lack of a better word, say a terrible man for spontaneous evenings. He would just grab the fiddle down, and I had a little melodeon, and we would just go for it. That was it. And there was no such thing as invitation. The latch lifted, and somebody walked in, and had a tin whistle in his pocket or a fiddle in a case, and they just sat down and enjoyed. There was no invitation, nothing. Hell for leather to morning. There's no looking around here. I am actually part of this. I've lived this. You people are talking about it. I've bloody lived it.
Listen, I'll tell you about Shay Hutchinson. Inside that hard exterior, there beats a heart of stone. Well.
I think I'll sing a wee song called The Light of the Moon. It was interesting, just round about 12 o'clock the tea and the food started to come in, and it reminded me just of the song, because whenever I was a child we used to go into the fields and make haystacks whenever the hay was being done, cut and put into stacks. And I remember my father would have been working in the fields and we would have been working with him, and my mother would have made her way up with a bag of food and some tea as well. And I just thought it was a nice sort of atmosphere, and I'll sing you that song now. Sing this song for Charlie and Bernie Ward, who are here tonight. Don't know if they'll sing with me, but we'll wait and see. There's an easy chorus to this song, so you're very welcome to sing with us. I took me a walk one late summer's evening. I walked till the sun left the sky. Then a gentle harvest moon like the rose came out in bloom and shone down its light from on high. A couple I did see, they were in love as love could be, as they danced and they held each other tight. And though the stars were in the sky, they were twinkling in their eyes under the silver moonlight. And under the light of the moon, under the light of the moon, true as the stars are in the sky, I will love you till I die, under the light of the moon. As I watch them pledge their love to the other, the tears down my face they did flow. For how were they to know that my heart was breaking so, for a love that I just can't let go? Then they quickly walked along till round the corner they were gone. I did beg to the moon in the sky, Mr. Man that's in the moon, let the time be coming soon, when my true love to me will cry. Let's try it. Under the light of the moon, under the light of the moon, true as the stars are in the sky, I will love you till I die, under the light of the moon, true as the stars are in the sky, I will love you till I die, under the light of the moon.
You can see what talent we have here tonight. Very fine singing there from Rosemary Woods. And we're swinging way over now to the other side of the country. And for again, very appropriate for Donegal people, we have one of the finest traditional players anywhere today. Reach Rafferty from Donegal, resident in Tyrone for the last few years. She has toured all over the world. She's one of our finest traditional musicians, and she's going to be joined by one of her pupils, who obviously has a great future ahead. He won the Tyrone Fla this year, and he fancies his chances now for the All-Ireland. Ryan Malloy and Breach is going to give us a selection of their tunes. The next act is something you all have been waiting for here. This next man actually introduced poetry to this part of the world. He recited poetry here when it was dangerous. To recite a poem here at one stage, you were taking your life in your own hands. and he's written an awful lot of his own poems, and this is about a very, very famous character who came to fame on the Clary Hayden travelling show. He entered the talent competition, but I'll just leave you in the very, very capable hands here. Declan Ford.
Hey, thanks, Paddy. I'm just trying to figure out what he said. Was it a lot of awful poems or an awful lot of poems? I'm just kidding. Got that mixed up. Anyway, this fine bunch of musicians are all dressed for the part now. As you can see, they've now put their Stetsons on and their chops, and they've got their steel guitars out. They're going to come in with a nice slow version of that well-known traditional tune, The Red River Valley. At the end of this tragic piece, all about a man whose lifetime ambition was only fulfilled when he went on the stage. It's also about the badness of women, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, any insults in this are purely intentional. John Aloysius Francis Maguire. Now some men were ruined by a greed for tin, and some were destroyed by a thirst for gin. And how many good men lost their wits and their senses to the gilded lily of a woman's pretences. But of those lost souls, none held his head higher than John Aloysius Francis Maguire, whose downfall was not ladies, liquor, or gold, but Clary Hayden travelling show. Once a year this travelling show set up its tent for a week or so to perform the Chakran or Colleen Bawn, and to entertain with dance and song. But for many gulpins, the sole attraction was the local talent competition, when budding artistes would trek to town for the holy grail of half a crown. These singers and dancers, musicianers and chancers would lap and lilt like birds in a cage, while each town land kept its biggest hand for its prodigal son on the stage. Now if hopes are just dreams and dreams are just wishes, then they all came through for John Aloysius. For the heart that thumped inside his breast had the soul of a cowboy from the wild, wild west. Though his Gansey was punctured with patches and stitches like his poke bag shirt and his moleskin skin breeches, when he strode on that stage with a magic guitar, he was no longer in a tent in Carrickmore, no longer hill farmer, no longer wild cowboy, but a singing, swinging Texas cowboy. John Aloysius Francis Maguire would practice for this for months in his byre, while milking the cow to his slow-tortured strains of the streets of Laredo and home on the range. Though the nearest he'd come to a longhorn steer was the moily he rustled from Mick-Mac-a-Lear, he'd yodel and croon for hours on end to his mangy old lass, his four-legged friend. Out capping cattle he'd be riding the range, with the bogs and the meadows his wide open plains. He had out on a hill farm his old Ponderosa, and why he dreamed cowboys' dreams nobody knows. On the day of the arrival of Mr. Clary Hayden, our hero'd saddle up and cycle into Carman, then mosey down the main street to Mickey Quinn's saloon to wait like Sheriff Kane for Hayden at high noon. There he'd practice his accent and his slow Texas twang, tip his cap to the weeman and drawl, "Well, howdy, ma'am." On the night of the talent, he'd come riding to town, casting long shadows as the evening sun went down. He'd ride tall in the saddle of his rusty old Raleigh, whistling and yodeling the Red River Valley, with "Get along, little doggie," and "Whoop-de-aye," hollering and guldering, free-wheeling down the brae. His cap was his Stetson, a bent briar was his gun, but John Maguire's dreams never killed anyone. He rode off into the sunset over 20 years ago, still dreaming childhood's cowboy dreams after 80 years or so. But when the last roundup's called to that great corral on high, and at last we're a-saddling those ghost riders in the sky, when the last wagon's hitched on that Oregon trail, and the last gunslinger sprung from the old county jail, around a heavenly campfire we'll sit 'neath twinkling stars, as Jean and Tex and Roy sing and strum guitars.
And who'll be a-leading the celestial cowboy choir? None other than John Aloysius Francis Maguire.
From this valley they say you are going. We will miss your bright eyes and sweet smile, for you take with you all of the sunshine that has brightened our pathway a while. So come sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu, but remember that Red River Valley and the cowboy that's loved you so true. Well, for a long time, my darling, I've waited for the sweet words you never would say. Now at last, my fond hopes have been vanished, for they say you are going away. Everybody this time! So come sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu, but remember that Red River Valley and the cowboy that's loved you so true. Yes, just remember that Red River Valley and the cowboy that's loved you so true.
Well done, Declan Ford. And Annie, I think I'll sit down this time. I deserve a wee rest. I'm taking a short rest.
Well, I came across Owen in a roundabout way. I had a 2CV Citroen, and he had one, and I came down, and I think he thought we were going to discuss mating the two of them together and breeding Citroens. But we came down and we discussed electricity, pylons, and our association stemmed from that. And we have gone from bad to verse ever since, you know, and I have been very much a part of the sessions here in the crack here, you know, and it's great fun. And I have 4 kids myself, and it is an absolutely tremendous place to take them. Yeah. In fact, my wee daughter thinks that Snow White lives here. So far I haven't seen the 7 little men that that are supposed to be about, but she's convinced of it. It has that atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, we're going to introduce 4 of them now shortly, you know. There's a thought. Yes, that's how we found the 7 at last. The Knotty Pines with a K and an N, and this time their heart is going to skip a beat.
My heart skips a beat when you walk down the street. I feel trembling in my knees, just to know you're mine till the end of town makes my heart skip a beat. Well, I did a double take the day I met you. My heart turned a flip when I stood next to you, and I knew right then I never could forget you, 'cause you are my every dream come true. Well, my heart skips a beat when you walk down the street. I feel trembling in my knees, just to know you're mine till the end of time makes my heart skip a beat. To my life without a warning, turn my cloudy skies in gray blue. You're my sunshine that comes up every morning. You are my every dream come true. Well, my heart skips a beat when you walk down the street. I feel trembling in my knees, just to know you're mine until the end of time makes my heart skip a beat. My heart skips a beat when you walk down the street. I feel trembling in my knees, just to know you're mine till the end of time makes my heart skip a beat.
Well, I think that after the war there were about 15,000 thatched cottages in Tyrone. This isn't a thatched cottage, of course, but if you want to find a thatched cottage now, and I have tried to photograph some in recent years, there are very few available anymore. They've all gone. And unfortunately, I think you'll have to go to the Ulster American Folk Park or something like that to find them. Yeah. I think the past is, and our heritage is what's at stake here. A lot of these cottages have been modernised, modern windows, modern doors, double glazing. You don't get that here. You're getting the dresser, you're getting the old plates on the dresser, and this is what we like to see. Even getting a dresser now is a problem. The dressers are picked up. A lot of them are sold abroad. A lot of them go to Scotland. A lot of them go to America. Getting a pine dresser like we see here is a rarity now. Well, this is a fascinating place because it is a mecca for people that are interested in traditional music, traditional poetry. In fact, a lot of the people that come here write their own music. A lot of them, as far as their instruments are concerned, are self-taught, and a lot of their poems are written by themselves. Well, I think that you'll find that very shortly the schools will come here, and they'll try to reinstate, I think, traditions of our ancestors. I think this is the object of the exercise. Going back to the past, the materialistic side of life has got too important with some people, and I think a lot of people want to revert back to what we knew and loved pre-last war. Well, certainly from the historical point of view, the historical societies are they're developing all over the countryside. It's not a case of an area now. Every town wants to have its own society. But I think that when we get back to the cottage here, this is unique. There aren't too many people like Owen Smith that are going to spend the money to start a venue like this in many parts of the country. Although I think you'll find when people come, they'll go off with ideas, and I've no doubt that people will try to do it in County Down and County Fermanagh and elsewhere. I have two cameras here this evening, this afternoon.
The one thing that always struck me about this area, and it comes across in your images of Omagh series, is that there's no town and country divide really, because Omagh is very much a country town, a market town.
Yes, very much a market town. I think Omagh caters basically for the farming community. We have very little industry, and from that point of view, we simply have to cater for the farming community. And of course, keeping colleges like this going, you're catering for what life was like in the earlier part of this century. And a lot of the younger generation that comes along here will see exactly how their grandfathers did live in this area, because this is in fact how they did live, as per the beds in the corner, the fire. Although the fire would have been the open fire, and it would have been turf. It wouldn't have been coal like we have it today.
Well, no, you would never have imagined, you could not have imagined what has happened in this house. Like, there've been people from all over the world, all over Europe. They've been from Australia, they've been from America, they've been from Switzerland. Every art and part of the world have been here. It's unbelievable, just, you could never have imagined. Well, no, I needed terracotta tiles for this floor. So I just put an ad in the local press, wanted 12-inch terracotta tiles, and old fella answered me ad anyway, and I went to see him. He called me up, and I went up and took a look around, and I says, this is hard. This man, we'd hardly have them. But he says, go over to that house, sir, he says, and they're there. I walked across this big field anyway and opened the door of the house, and here was 5 big sturrocks. Nice bullocks standing in about a foot of dung. And I kicked the dung away anyway, and here with big yellow tiles. My God, says I couldn't believe it. But anyway, I got them here. This is the kind of thing I done, like, you know, everything had to be local. The bricks in the fireplace, for instance, they're handmade bricks. They've come from Arvalee Bog down the road. The roof on the house was the slits are off Omagh Creamery. There's not many people about Omagh that would know where the creamery was, but the roof's now in this house.
A particular feature of this place that strikes us all, Dr. Haldane Mitchell joins us again, is the fact that when we talk of history, and you're a historian yourself, we're talking here about living history as distinct from a museum, and that's very exciting.
I think you'll find that as a year, I think that we have got something going here that I've no doubt could give rise to something greater in the years to come. We could end up with a traditional festival in Omagh, maybe bigger than anything else that there is in Ireland today.
And as you will be aware, that the Mid-Ulster Drama Festival for 25 years now takes place at Carrickmore, not far from us. And next year they will be hosting the All-Ireland Drama Festivals, which is a great tribute not only to all the companies who come and perform at Carrickmore, but the people who had founded the festival in the first place and kept it going over the years. The people up around here must have seen more plays than anybody on Broadway. Put it about that.
You might have heard a couple of fellas there playing earlier on. Young fella here on the guitar, Peter Farrell, is going to keep them right. Pat McCullough here, one of the best banjo players about. One of the best banjo players you'll hear anywhere. And the young fellow over there, I taught him a few tunes on the accordion, Hugh Grogan. We're going to play a selection. I think the name of it is Denny O'Brien Selection. Is that right? Denny O'Brien Selection.
Here all last summer, we did every Wednesday and every Saturday night, and we had some great nights here. People from all over the world, all arts and parts. They came from Australia and New Zealand and America, and we had one night we had 26 Czechoslovaks in here. There was a man from around this town called Felix Kearney Sr., and of course Felix Kearney was hired out in the 1920s. He went off to Scotland, along with a very famous Donegal novelist and writer, a man called the Navvy poet, Paddy McGill. And they were both hired out in Scotland. Of course, Paddy McGill, when he was there, wrote those two great books, The Rat Pit and The Children of the Dead End. And I thought I was singing a song that Felix Kearney wrote about his native place when he was feeling very homesick in Scotland. He wrote a song called The Hills Above Drumquin. Now God bless the hills of Donegal, I've heard their praises sung.
young recall when I was very young. But still I pray to see the day before life's race is run, that I can sing the praises of the hills above Drum. You got the job. Now the winds around the Rumbarley make the hills a yellow blaze. When the heather turns to purple on my native Dressog braes, and the limestone rocks of Claramore are glistening in the sun, when nature's at her grandest on the hills above Drumquin. Now Drumquin, you're not a city, but you're all the world to me. Your lot I ne'er will pity, though you'll never greater be. Sure I love you as I know you, when from school I used to run on my homeward journey through you to the hills above Drumquin. I have wandered through the highlands with their beauties rich and grand. I have rambled round the lowlands, it's a cold and heartless land, but I never be downhearted, for when each day's work is done, sure my mind goes back at sunset to the hills above Drumquin. Now this life is sad and dreary, and the task of it is sore. My bones are growing weary, I may never wander more. So lay me down in Langfield when my course on earth is run, on the sheltering slopes of Dewish, on the hills above Drumquin, on the sheltering slopes of Dewish, on the hills above Drumquin.
And it's a song which is written about maybe 3 years ago. I just moved over to London, and it was the first night there that I wrote this. It's easy to write songs like that when you come from a background like this. I'm not saying I grew up in a cottage like this, but this sort of background. So.
Looking like a stranger watching the river run by, I was thinking about yesterday, that tear in your eye. 'Cause I wasn't sure if I knew where I was going, but it was gonna be so hard. And when the plane touched down, I could hear the sound of a totally different world. A totally different world. Gonna take a chance no matter how hard it might seem. Living here with a new career, satisfying all my dreams. All the same I can feel the pain 'cause I'm far away. So I stop and smile for a little while, remembering those days. Home is where the heart is. Home with those good friends of mine. Home is where my world is. I know. When I walk outside, I can feel the heat of the same sun. And I like you to hear when I talk the same as I've ever done. I miss my friends in the green grass and the pouring rain. It's good to see that you welcome me when you hardly know my name. Home is where the heart is. Home with those good friends of mine. Home is where my world is. Home is, I know. I haven't been talking to you since I went away. How you doing? I hope you're okay. Did you get that job you were looking for? Did things not turn out right? Will you ever back to a little place where we used to go in the summer? Home is where the heart is. Home with those good friends of mine. Home is where my world is. Home is, I know. Home is where the heart is. Home with those good friends of mine. Home is where my world is. Home is, I know. I know.
Well done indeed. That's Eamon McElhone there, and Shay Hutchinson is going to sing for us next. But before he starts, because it's the last opportunity to talk to Shay, a very poignant moment in the afternoon, sure, I'll have a wee word with him before I start anyway. Seriously, what I recall about the benefit concert for you, Shay Hutchinson, deny if you may, earlier on this year in Killyclougher, was that although you threw up your hands and said, ah, well, sure, that's the way it is, you were actually genuinely moved by a lot of the tributes.
I was more embarrassed, believe it or not. I mean, it's okay to read about yourself and this, that, and the other, and what have you, but when someone stands and looks straight into your eye and tells you, you know, you really are great, Christ, it's very embarrassing. It really is.
Well, I won't do it then.
Yeah, I'll leave that one. I'll get you for that later, however.
Now, you're going to do a monologue this time, Golden Guitar. Monologues, you don't hear as much of them anymore, but who was it, Hawkshaw?
I believe it was Hawkshaw Hawkins, either him or Whispering Bill Smith, was it, or John Smith? Any help there from the nonchalant?
Sure, we'll do it anyway.
Aye.
Okay, take it away.
I just happened to walk into a honky-tonk one night down in New Orleans. Up above the bar hung a big guitar like none I've ever seen. The neck was studded with diamonds and though the strings were old, like kings of sound they wander round the 6 keys of solid gold. A man stepped up beside me, his breath was heavy with wine. He said, that guitar once belonged to a mighty close pal of mine. He used to play in here, I forget the year, around 45, I think. I could tell you quite a story, friend, if you'd care to buy me a drink. Well, possessed by every weakness that makes a man a fool, I bought a round and he drank it down and then he rocked back on his stool. He said, yeah, I remember now. It was 45, all right. He just returned from the Great War. It was there that he lost his sight. His buddies gave him that guitar. Back then it was simple and plain. And he'd hided the gold and the diamonds as he played his way to fame. And he was doing a show in Shreveport on the night he'd received the call to come appear on the Grand Ole Opry, the greatest show of all. And I was driving him down to Nashville. It was dark and mist and rain. The signals flashed and the whistles screamed, but I swear, mister, I swear, I never did see that train. I heard the kindly doctor say just after he'd used his knife, "You're lucky, son, you lost an arm. It could have been your life." But he died that night. Life just demanded more than he could give. I reckon he could have made it, but he just lost the will to live. But this world's loss is heaven's gain, and tonight he's still a star, 'cause he plays with a band of angels, you see. That's my son's golden guitar.
Many's a gay night from dark till daylight I spend with people of high renown, but in all their grandeur and heaps to squander, my heart would wander for sweet Omagh town.